I'm the Ural sales specialist here, motorcycle specialist here. I've been riding motorcycles for over 50 years. I've been working on motorcycles for over 30 years. So, first off, you want to make sure that when you get your motorcycle, you can set this up and you can make adjustments to make it more comfortable for you. So, you can move the bars back and forth, up and down to a certain amount, but what you do want to make sure you're careful of is to keep the handlebars in a proper plane, which means that if you look at it from the side, you'll notice if you look at these from the side, the bar is pretty level right here. If you're shorter and you try to move them up, what happens is when you push them up, it turns your hands in. And then you end up doing this and it's not going to be comfortable. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're adjusting the bars. The only thing you have to do to adjust the bars is loosen these 4 bolts up and move them up and down. Once you got the bars the way you want them, then you go for the levers. The levers are just a matter of loosening these 2 bolts up here, moving them up and down. You want to be able to reach them comfortably. You don't want to have to reach up. You don't want to have to reach down when you're riding. With a sidecar rig where you're sitting down 99% of the time, you know, off-road bikes when you're standing up, you want to tilt them down some so you can kind of reach down and get them. But if you're sitting, as long as you reach it, you should be able to just reach out and grab them. So once you get that set, then you set your mirrors, and you're basically good to go at that point because those are the only things that are really adjustable. The next thing is the suspension. You know, I tell everybody that the suspension is adjustable on the motorcycle. It's adjustable at each corner. There is a special tool in the toolkit. It's the spanner wrench. And the way this works is you adjust it by turning this collar on the bottom right here. This hooks in here, and the more pressure you put on the spring, it's able to handle more weight. You're not making the spring stiffer by moving it. A straight wound spring will fight the amount of force applied to it no matter what the length is. So if you're moving up an inch, you're not making it stiffer. All you're doing is making it support weight a little bit better. Once you have that set correctly, and those are the only settings, the only suspension settings that you have on a Ural with stock suspension. You don't have compression and rebound settings, but this setting is important because it makes the bike handle correctly. When it comes out of the box, whenever you take delivery of it, it's usually pretty much set for what you're going to be riding and with a nominal amount of weight in the sidecar. If you add more weight in the sidecar, if you have a healthy passenger and you feel the car tip down a little bit when you're riding it, that's when you make adjustments to the suspension to raise it back up again. So you go up on the shock, the spring, to add more pressure to bring the attitude of the car up. While we're talking about suspension, I also wanted to go over the front suspension a little bit. A lot of people want to know, why is it this way versus that way? So you got conventional forks there versus this type of front suspension. A lot of people think it's just for off-road or it's something Ural came up with to make themselves different, but it actually is very, very important in the way the sidecar handles, because more so with the sidecar than with a motorcycle, but it has a lot of effect on a motorcycle too, is that when you're in a panic situation and you get on the brakes, your front end dives, and as soon as your front end dives, the forks shorten up, so the whole steering geometry changes. So if you're not used to that, now theoretically you're in a panic situation and you're riding a motorcycle you're not used to because it doesn't handle the same way. So what this system does is it counteracts that. It separates the braking from the steering. So you can stand on it, you can get in a situation, you're on the brakes, you push on the front end doesn't move, okay? So all the handling characteristics, the steering geometry, all stays the same. Whether you're riding it or whether you're trying to stop, whether you're trying to stop and turn, anything you get into, the suspension stays the same, so the handling stays the same. With a sidecar rig, if the suspension drops like on the front forks, the sidecar and the motorcycle tend to drive into each other. So now you're fighting this way and this way. So this counteracts all that. The nice thing too is that, Matt, come here a second. All right, I got my hand on the brake, front end won't move, everything's stiff. You'd think every time I hit a bump it would jar you. Push up and down on the front end. So so it separates the two. So the front end will still absorb all the bumps, do everything it's supposed to do, while you're still driving the same motorcycle you're normally accustomed to, because the steering geometry doesn't change. So that's why that's set up like that. The bikes that we have that have forks on them, they're valved in such a way so they negate most of this. But optimally, this is the best way. A lot of manufacturers have done things similar. BMW uses telelever. They started back with Ural's forks back in the 60s to do the same thing, whether it's a motorcycle or a sidecar rig. It keeps the suspension separate from the steering, so it makes the bike handle like you're accustomed to no matter what situation you're in. The next thing is we'll go down the side. I mean, very basic. You have your oil filter here. That's just like any other screw-on, screw-off oil filter. You know, you put a little oil on the ring, you screw it on, you hand tighten that. The instructions on how to tighten that are on the side of the oil filter. The draining fields for the transmission and the engine are up under. We have service kits over here to kind of show you what each one of those look like. If you've got an older Ural pre-2014, it uses this kind of filter. All of them from 2014 forward use just a spin-on filter like that, just like any little car filter. Urals have a separate engine transmission lubrication system, so it's like a car. You've got engine oil in the engine, you've got separate fluid in the transmission, you got a dual plate dry clutch, so it keeps things separate. Everything's targeted to lubricate what it's supposed to, and you don't have intermingling like if you've got transmission shavings or clutch dirt in your engine oil. So that's one of the reasons why it helps it last longer. Most of them will have the, behind this side cover, you'll have all the access to all your fuses. Most all the bikes have center stands on them, so you can take the wheels and tires off of them. Usually I've suggested in the past to people, because you can deploy the center stand to get the rear wheel off while you're on the ground. It's not that big a deal. The fronts you need to support in some way. They sell these little teeny weeny bottle jacks that are more than enough to put under the front end of the sidecar. Back in the back, there's a special tool in the tool kit to get the spare tire off the rack. That's what this is for, little pin wrench. So that swings up and off and allows you to get to the tire. Any questions so far?
Is there a service manual available?
Service manual, they really haven't produced a service manual since 2014 when they changed things. The owner's manual is very comprehensive. Okay. It will, it tells you not only how to ride the motorcycle, how to operate all the controls and stuff, but it also tells you all the service, how to do all the service. So it's, you know, it's pretty in depth. It tells you how to take the wheels off, tells you how to change the oil, how to adjust the valves, all that stuff's in here. Gives you torque specs. Even tells you how to line up the sidecar. There's a wiring diagram, fault codes for the fuel injection system, the whole bit. Everything's in here. So along with the toolkit, it's pretty in depth. It's It's not like nowadays when you buy something, you give you a screwdriver and a book of disclaimers.
Yeah.
Once you get your bike set up and you start riding it, along with checking tire pressure, it's not a bad idea to give the bike a good looking over every now and then, make sure you don't see anything loose. Check your tires. Along with the tire pressure, check your spokes. They can come loose. Easiest ways to check them is with just a wrench or something. Just the way they sound when you hit them. When you hit one that's got a dead sound, then you know it's loose. We have a torque wrench for the spokes that allow you to torque the spokes up to the proper torque. You know, there's no lock rings or Loctite or anything on them. They're spoked wheels. It can happen. It's not a bad idea to have to keep an eye on it, especially in the beginning. But other than that, looking over everything, making sure that everything's all safe, checking your tire pressures and all that kind of stuff. You should do that fairly often. Any questions yet? Okay.
How can you get it up on a side stand as it sits? Do you need something else to go with it, or can you do it?
Well, putting it on a side stand is by yourself, it's kind of difficult, but there's a trick. Because when you deploy the stand, it will come down by itself, but it takes a lot to pull it up on there. So the trick is to find yourself a big rock or something to roll the front of the bike up on, like a little ramp. Leave it in gear, pull the stand down, and then pull the clutch in so the bike rolls back down and the bike will actually put itself on the center stand.
I know I need my boots and not sneakers.
Yes. Yeah, you should be right. You should be using boots anyway. But yeah, that's it's fairly difficult, but that trick makes it a lot easier. Yeah, it'll just about if you get it just right, it'll just about put itself on the center stand. And then once you get it on the center stand, the rear wheel will come off. I've done it before, sitting in someone's driveway. So you can change that rear tire pretty easy. So along with all the tools, the bike comes with touch-up paint. Take care of any chips. You should be on top of that, because if you get a chip in it somewhere, you know, no amount of paint work and all is going to deal with that. You have to kind of stay on top of that to make sure the paint doesn't flake off. Make sure it stays nice. So yeah, if you guys don't have any more questions.
So I have a question.
Okay.
I have an old 2013 Patrol, and over time the clutch cable seems like it's gone out of adjustment, so it's hard to find neutral. Mm-hmm. And can you point out the adjustment to make? Sure.
I mean, it's pretty straightforward, and it's something that everybody should be kind of aware of too, because it will change over time as your clutch wears. And a lot of people think that because we've seen them come in both ways. We've seen them come in where they have no free play, and we've seen them come in with a ton of free play. Your situation where you're getting too much free play in the cable, your clutch doesn't pull in far enough, so it's hard to find neutral. So it's just like basically pulling the clutch in halfway.
Okay.
You should have a couple of millimeters free play here before you start feeling the clutch actuate. A couple of millimeters basically equates to if you were to take 2 pennies, pull the clutch out just enough to where you can feel it start to tighten the cable up, you should be able to fit 2 pennies in here.
Okay. Wait, I want to see where you're pointing to. 2 pennies. Where?
Yeah, right in here, right between the lever and the perch.
Okay.
That gives you the right amount of free play.
All right.
If you need to adjust that, you can. There's a quick adjustment up here, and then there's a down beside the transmission where the cable runs down. There's a little harder to get to adjustment.
Right.
So this is the easy way to do it first. But yeah, we've seen people come in here with that much free play, and complaining that they can't get the bike in gear.
Okay.
Well, you're basically, you're not even really pulling the clutch
Mine
in.
is I can't find neutral.
Yeah.
Okay.
That
It's still
just,
an adjustment on here.
still adjustment on here.
Okay.
Because if you don't get the clutch pulled in, disengaged, then there's still the clutch is still moving the transmission, so you can't find neutral near as well.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Same thing with the throttle. There should be a little bit of free play in the throttle as well. And that's because so you can move the handlebars back and forth. If you ever get one with the throttle cable too tight, you'll notice you move the handlebars one way or the other really hard, the bike speeds up. So there's not enough free play in there. So those are two adjustments you can kind of keep your eye on, especially the clutch. It's not that difficult to adjust. It's just a matter of loosening this lock nut up and then screwing this in or out to get the proper clearance. Make sure you do it when it's cold, because as the clutch plate heats up, this changes. That's the other reason why you need to make sure you have free play in there, because you still need to maintain a certain amount of free play whether the clutch is hot or cold.
Gotcha.
Anything else? Ask me anything. There's no such thing as a dumb question.
How do you access the battery?
The battery, it depends on which model it is. If it's a gear up or a CT, the battery comes out of the top. So you undo the seat. With these, you have the seat plate, and the battery comes out of the top. On the retros and the M70s, the battery comes out of the side. Which brings up a couple of other good points too, now as you talk about batteries. A battery is a dangerous thing if you don't take it out properly, you don't handle it properly. You should always disconnect the battery cables a certain sequence and connect them back a certain sequence. You disconnect the ground first, then the positive, then when you put it back in, you connect the positive and then the ground. Because if your wrench happens to hit the frame, engine, that sort of thing, it can arc. And an arc is bad enough, but I've actually seen times when someone would have a battery blow up when the arc hits. The batteries that we use are sealed batteries. Those are a lot safer because they don't gas like a conventional battery does. And most of the bikes that you'll see, that when they come from the factory, they'll have what's called a wet mat battery in them, which means that it's a standard lead acid battery, and they use fiberglass between the battery plates to control the amount of fluid in the battery so they can actually run it sealed. So it's maintenance free, but the type of battery charger you use is still like any conventional battery. What you have to be careful of is that you have to make sure you don't have a gel battery, because gel batteries, you have to use a different charger. Gels are similar. Instead of using regular fluid or fiberglass mat to control the fluid, a gel battery actually has a gel solution between the plates. Well, an AGM is called active glass mat. That's not a gel battery. That's the same. That's what these are. A gel battery it'll actually have gel on it. Gel batteries are more temperamental to being overcharged. You have to control the amount of charge rate on a gel battery more than you do a conventional battery. They'll overheat. The gel doesn't do as well with the voltage swings as a conventional battery does. So a gel battery charger is just a little bit more sophisticated to keep the charging rate within a tighter parameters. If you have to use a conventional battery charger, like a battery tender on a gel battery, just make sure you keep an eye on it, make sure the case doesn't overheat, because they will overheat, and when they overheat, the plates warp, and I have seen them warp enough to where the plates will actually touch, and then the battery shorts out and then it's useless. Same thing with the wintertime when a battery gets too cold. The conventional batteries are more susceptible to it, but if as the voltage of a battery goes down, the acid to water ratio in the fluid swings more towards the water side than acid. The acid is absorbed into the plates, so a battery will freeze, and when it freezes, then it warps the plates because of expansion. So even if you have a battery and it's stored in the cold weather, as long as you keep it charged, it'll be fine.
Question on oil changes.
Okay.
If you don't use the bike that much in a season, Should you still change the oil every season?
Yes, by all means. Oil is hygroscopic, which means it absorbs moisture out of the air, whether you're using it or not. So if you're running a bike, you're going to get dirt buildup in the oil from running the engine, from changes in the weather and that sort of thing. Even if you don't use it, it's still going to absorb moisture into the air, and the moisture is going to break it down. So once a year is at a minimum. People, if you don't put enough miles on it to need a full service, like things like valve adjustment, you can let it set for 10 years and the valve adjustment won't change, as long as you don't have things like rust or corrosion get involved in it. But fluids, and brake fluid's the worst. Brake fluids, everything's hygroscopic. Your brake fluid, your transmission fluid, your engine oil, they all absorb a certain amount of moisture out of the air. Brake fluid's the worst, then engine oil, and then hypoid's probably the least affected by it. So that's why we always say, a certain number of mileage or once a year. So at least once a year, you should change all the fluids, including especially your brake fluid. Okay, if there's nothing else, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming.